The air inside the training camp was heavy, not just with heat, but with judgment. She stood in the middle of the yard, boots pressed into the dirt, chest rising and falling as the voices around her grew sharper. A group of officers had gathered, their eyes cold, their words cutting. "Remove your uniform," one barked, his tone echoing like a command that carried no room for hesitation. The world seemed to pause as those words sank in. The other recruits turned their heads, some hiding smirks, others whispering behind hands. She had always been different, and different was dangerous here. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face showed no weakness. She reached for the buttons, undoing them one by one, while the silence grew louder than the shouting had been moments ago. The uniform that had been her shield, the one thing that made her feel like she belonged, was being stripped away under their order. To them she was unworthy, an outsider who dared to step into a world they thought wasn't made for her. The wind picked up, brushing dust across the yard, and as her jacket slid off her shoulders, a shadow of ink emerged across her skin. It wasn't just a tattoo, it was a symbol, dark, striking, carved into her back like fire etched in flesh. The officers froze. The same ones who had ordered her to uncover herself now stood silent, their authority crumbling under the weight of something they did not expect. The whispers stopped. The smirks vanished. Fear rippled through the crowd like lightning. That tattoo wasn't decoration. It was history. It was defiance. It was something everyone in that camp had been taught to fear. No one knew her full story. To them, she was just another recruit. A girl trying to survive in a place where most never made it through. But behind that tattoo lay a past she had never shared. A past written in blood, in nights without sleep, in battles fought not on fields but inside her very soul. When she was younger, her world had been torn apart by war. Her village was nothing more than smoke and broken bricks by the time she was 12. She remembered the sound of boots stomping through her home, the fire that swallowed her memories, and the cold hands that dragged her away. She was not supposed to survive. Yet she did. Not because of kindness, but because she refused to give them her fear. The mark on her back was not given, it was earned. It belonged to a resistance, a group so feared by regimes and soldiers alike that their name was whispered like a curse. The tattoo was their emblem, drawn only on those who had faced the fire and lived. She had been one of them, not by choice, but by survival. When they found her in the ruins of her life, broken and alone, they didn't pity her, they tested her, and she fought. She clawed her way through every trial, carrying scars deeper than her skin. By the time she was 14, she bore the ink that now silenced this entire camp. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes locked on that mark. They had been trained to see it as a threat, a reminder of enemies who never bowed down. And now it was here, alive, breathing, standing right in front of them in the form of the girl they thought they could humiliate. But the story didn't end there. She had left that life behind. She wanted more than survival. She wanted meaning, a chance to build rather than destroy. That's why she had come here, why she put on that uniform in the first place. She wanted to serve, to protect, to become something greater than her pain. Yet no one here knew that. They only saw her as an outsider, too fragile, too different, too unwanted, until now. The silence stretched longer, thick like fog. Then one of the younger recruits stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that real?" he whispered. His voice carried enough for everyone to hear. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was carved into her skin, undeniable, unshakable. The officer who had ordered her to strip clenched his jaw, his pride battling against the fear in his chest. He wanted to regain control, to reassert his dominance, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted nervously across the tattoo, as if it might leap from her skin and consume him whole. For the first time since she had arrived, she was no longer invisible. She was untouchable. But inside, she felt the storm rising again. That tattoo was not just power. It was pain. Every line of ink carried the weight of lives lost, friends buried, promises broken. To her, it was not a badge of honor. It was a scar that never healed. She didn't want their fear. She wanted their respect. She wanted them to see her as more than the shadow of her past. Her breath caught in her chest as she stood taller, her eyes burning with quiet fire. "You told me to remove my uniform," she said softly, her voice steady, calm, but edged with steel. Now you see who I really am. The air cracked with tension. The camp that once mocked her now stood at a crossroads, caught between despising her for the past she carried and bowing to the strength she represented. Every recruit, every officer, every eye was on her, waiting, judging, wondering. And in that moment, she realized this was not the end of her struggle. This was only the beginning. For now they knew her secret, and secrets had power. But power can be a burden as heavy as chains. The dust swirled around her feet, the silence deafening, her heart pounding. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this moment would define everything that came next. Whether she rose higher than she had ever dreamed, or whether they crushed her under the weight of fear, all depended on what happened in the next breath. And then, the officer stepped forward, his boots cracking against the ground like thunder in the silence. His hand hovered near his belt, not for his weapon, but as if to steady himself from the tremor in his chest. His eyes, once filled with authority, now carried something rawer. Fear, respect, confusion. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling for words. "You," he finally said, his voice quieter than before. "You don't belong here." The words sliced through her, sharper than any blade. She had carried this mark across fire, hunger, and the endless nights of hiding. She had survived things none of them could imagine, and yet still, to him, she didn't belong. The recruits shifted uneasily, their young faces torn between curiosity and doubt. Some looked at her with awe, others with suspicion, but none dared speak. She swallowed hard, refusing to let her voice crack. "I came here because I choose to belong," she said. Her tone was steady, almost calm, though her heart raced like a drumbeat of war. "Not because of who I was, but because of who I want to be." The camp leader's jaw clenched. He hated losing control, hated the silence that hung like chains around his command. But before he could answer, an older voice cut through the air. It belonged to the general, an aging man with silver in his hair and a gaze sharp enough to pierce steel. He had been watching from the shadows, silent until now. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Everyone straightened at once, fear replaced by stiff obedience. The general's eyes fell on her tattoo, and for a long moment he simply stared. "I know that, Mark," he said at last. His voice carried the weight of memory, of battles fought long ago. "I fought against those who bore it. They were fearless, relentless, unstoppable." He stepped closer, his boots deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. "And yet here you stand, wearing our uniform." Her chest tightened. She didn't know whether he would cast her out or allow her to stay. Every second stretched like an eternity. The general circled her slowly, the way a man studies a weapon before deciding whether it is dangerous or worth wielding. The other recruits watched, wide-eyed, breaths held. Even the officer who had ordered her to strip kept silent now, his authority reduced to nothing in the shadow of the general's presence. Finally, the general stopped in front of her. "Tell me," he said, his voice low but powerful, "what do you want? Why are you here, carrying the past that could destroy you?" Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out. "Because I am tired of being feared. I don't want to be remembered for the war that made me. I want to be remembered for the peace I can protect." The words hit the air like sparks, and for the first time the silence broke. Not with laughter, not with whispers, but with something heavier. The recruits leaned forward, listening. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, and the general's eyes softened, just enough for her to see. "You carry a heavy burden," he said quietly, "but sometimes the heaviest burdens forge the strongest soldiers." Her breath caught. Was this acceptance, or another test? The general turned to the others. "You see this mark and tremble," he told them, "but fear blinds you. What you should see is not her past, but her will. If she has walked through fire and still stands here, then she has already proven herself more than any of you." The recruits shifted again, but this time their eyes held something different. Not mockery, not suspicion, something closer to respect. The officer who had humiliated her clenched his fists, his pride burning, but he could say nothing against the general's word. For the first time since she had entered the camp, she felt the faintest flicker of hope, not because they admired her yet, not because she was safe, but because the truth of her spirit had been spoken aloud. That night, lying on the hard bunk, she stared at the ceiling, the echoes of the day still crashing inside her. She touched the tattoo on her back, feeling the raised ridges like a map of pain carved into her skin. For years it had been a curse, a brand that reminded her she was not like the others. But now, maybe, just maybe, it could become something else. Still, her journey was far from over. The camp was filled with tests, trials designed to break even the strongest. And though the general's words had shielded her for a moment, she knew the others would watch her more closely now. Some would want her to fail, to prove their fear right. Others would want to follow her, though they didn't understand why. The days grew harder, the drills longer, the punishments harsher. Her body screamed for rest, but her soul pushed her forward. Every time she stumbled, she remembered the faces of those who never made it out of the ruins of her village. Every time she bled, she remembered the fire that took everything from her but left her alive. Every time she thought of quitting, she touched the tattoo, reminding herself that survival had already been her greatest victory. But survival was not enough anymore. She wanted more. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in red and gold, the recruits were ordered to climb the high wall, a wall that had broken many before. One by one they tried, some making it, most falling. When it was her turn, the whispers began again. "She won't make it," one muttered. "That mark doesn't mean she's strong, just cursed," another spat. She stepped forward, her hands pressing against the rough stone. The wall loomed tall, merciless, but she looked up without flinching. The first pull burned her arms, the second tore at her palms. Her muscles shook, her breath came ragged, but she climbed higher, inch by inch as the others watched. Halfway up, her strength faltered. The world blurred. She heard their voices again, louder now, waiting for her to fall. But then, deep inside, she remembered the general's words. The heaviest burdens forged the strongest soldiers. Her hand found another grip. Her foot pressed against another hold. She climbed higher and higher, until finally, with one last surge, she pulled herself to the top. Silence fell. Every eye was on her. She stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping, her silhouette framed against the dying sun. For a moment, she wasn't the girl with the feared tattoo. She wasn't the outsider. She was something else. Proof that strength is born not from privilege or pride, but from pain carried with unbreakable will. And as she looked down at them all, standing tall on that wall, she knew something had shifted forever. She stood there, high above the camp, the last glow of the sun painting her face in firelight. The recruits below still watched in silence, their expressions a storm of emotions. Some were angry that she had proved them wrong, others were shaken, and a few had eyes wide with something they did not expect: admiration. The general's gaze was locked on her, steady and unflinching, but there was the faintest nod, almost invisible, as if he had been waiting for this moment. When she climbed down, her hands torn and bleeding, no one dared to laugh. No one dared to whisper. She walked past them, shoulders straight, eyes forward. That night, as she lay on her bunk, she realized that respect was not handed freely here. It had to be earned, piece by piece, through pain and proof. She had given them the first piece, but many more would be demanded. Days turned into weeks. The training broke others, strong men who had entered with pride but crumbled under the weight of endurance. Yet she remained, her body screaming, her spirit burning, refusing to bend. And with every test, the eyes around her changed a little more. The whispers turned from mockery to curiosity, then from curiosity to silence, and eventually silence gave way to something far rarer in that place: quiet respect. But not everyone welcomed her rise. The officer who had once ordered her to strip, the one who had tried to humiliate her, watched her like a predator in the shadows. His pride had been wounded, and pride can be more dangerous than hate. He pushed her harder during drills, punished her longer for mistakes others got away with. He wanted her broken, wanted her crushed under the same fear he had once seen in her eyes. One evening, after a brutal exercise that left the recruit sprawled on the ground, gasping for air, he called her out in front of everyone. If you're as strong as that mark on your back says you are, prove it, he sneered. He pointed to the heavy logs stacked at the edge of the yard, used only for the most grueling trials. Carry it, alone. The recruits gasped. Even teams struggled to lift those logs. Alone, it was almost impossible. She looked at it, then back at him. His smirk told her everything. This wasn't a test, it was a trap. If she failed, she'd be humiliated again. If she refused, she'd be branded a coward. Her body ached, her muscles still raw from days without rest. But deep inside, she felt the old fire, the one that had carried her through nights in burning ruins, the one that had whispered to her when everyone else had been silenced forever. She walked to the log. The crowd watched, holding their breath. Her hands gripped the rough wood, her shoulders screamed under the weight, but she lifted. Inch by inch, with a cry torn from her soul, she raised it to her shoulders and began to move. Each step was agony. Her knees buckled, sweat poured, blood dripped from her palms, but she kept walking. Around the yard, one step, another, the world blurring as pain consumed her. The recruits couldn't look away. The officer's smirk faded, replaced by disbelief. By the time she dropped the log, her body collapsed with it. She lay in the dirt, trembling, her chest heaving. But the yard was silent. Then slowly, one by one, the recruits began to clap. Not mockery, not pity. Real, thunderous applause that shook the camp. She looked up, dazed, her vision blurred by sweat and tears. And there she saw it. The respect she had fought for, glowing in their eyes at last. The general stepped forward, his voice carrying over the noise. "Remember this moment," he told the others. "Strength is not about who carries the cleanest uniform or who shouts the loudest orders. It is about who carries the heaviest burden and still stands." His eyes met hers. She has carried more than any of you can imagine, and yet she stands. From that night, everything changed. The recruits no longer whispered when she passed. They no longer doubted her place among them. Some even sought her guidance, asking how she endured, how she found strength when theirs faltered. And though she still bore the mark that once made them fear, now they began to see it not as a curse, but as a symbol of survival. The officer who had hated her most grew silent. His power over her broken, his pride shattered. In time, he kept his distance, his anger fading into something he could not admit, respect he would never voice aloud. But for her, the greatest change was not in them. It was in herself. For years, the tattoo had been a shadow she tried to outrun, a reminder of fire and ashes. But here, in this camp, through pain and struggle, it became something new. It became proof that she was not broken, that she could take the fear others placed on her and turn it into strength. The final test came at the end of training, when they were led to the field beyond the camp, where obstacles stood tall and merciless. It was said that only those who finished earned the right to wear the uniform for real. The recruits set out together, but many fell behind. She pushed forward, each obstacle tearing at her, each wall, each pit, each rope pulling her closer to collapse. But she did not stop. When her hands bled, she climbed higher. When her legs gave way, she forced them to rise. When her lungs burned, she breathed through the fire. And as the sun rose high above, she crossed the finish line. Not first, not last, but with every ounce of herself poured into the dirt behind her. When it was over, the general placed the uniform back on her shoulders. Not as a costume, not as a shield, but as a truth she had earned. The camp saluted her. The recruits she had once feared now stood beside her, not as enemies but as comrades. She touched the tattoo on her back one last time, and for the first time in her life she did not feel the weight of shame. She felt pride, not in the mark itself, but in what she had become despite it. Her journey had begun with humiliation, with a command meant to strip her of dignity, yet it ended with something far greater than dignity. It ended with honor, with strength, with a story carved into her skin and her soul that no one could ever take away. And as she stood tall among them, she knew this truth. The things that others fear about you can one day become the things that make you unforgettable. Sometimes the scars we carry are not chains, they are wings.